The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our show, Ask Raphael. I'm Betty Ray.
And I'm Holly.
And we're coming to you today to talk about some of our favorite books. We hope you love to read books as much as we do, especially spiritual ones. There's such a gamut of books out there that are just really exciting. And we're going to bring a few of them today to tell you about them if you haven't already read them, to encourage you to pick them up and allow that to be part of your meditation time, or you're catching up on spiritual ideas. So the first book we're going to talk about is written by Peter Richelieu, and it's called A Soul's Journey. Let me turn it a little bit like this. I think I got it. There we go. Peter Richelieu, Soul's Journey, and thank you, Jason is putting it out there for you. And on the back, it tells you a bit about it, so I'm just going to take the easy way out, and I'm going to read what it says. It just makes it easier. This is the story. Henry is grief-stricken over the wartime death of his brother, Charles, a pilot in the RAF. His mourning brings on such a state of depression that he cries out for help in understanding this cruel blow. Unexpectedly, his plea is answered in the form of a teacher, a Hindu adept, who calls on Henry at his home in Ceylon. When Henry asks, "Why are you here?" the teacher responds, "You sent for me." Well, the teacher explains that Charles is very much alive and offers to demonstrate this fact firsthand. So he arranges to meet Henry on the astral plane after he falls asleep at night. But it is not just the teacher that Henry meets, but Charles himself. Henry learns how the inner being of every human remains alive after the moment of death and can interact with loved ones as they sleep. Even though the loved one usually has no memory of this fact when they awaken in the morning. So Henry eagerly accepts the acolyte or the teacher's tutelage and guidance as he explores the 7 subplanes of the astral world and the mental plane as well. In the process, he learns the Devic kingdom from fairies to angels and their special relationship with humanity. He also learns about karma, reincarnation, purgatory, evolution, and much more. This edition features a preface from a Robert L. Lechman, MD. The artwork on the cover is She Who Leads by the Russian painter Nicholas Retch. And I'll put it up again because I think the cover, I gotta get it straight. There we go. The cover is really very interesting too. Well, Holly's read this book too, and I found it absolutely eye-opening and mind-blowing. And I recommend it to all of you because it helps you to understand that life goes on afterwards, but that for each individual, it's a different path. It's a different life because it's just God's way of setting it up to be what you need at the time of your passing. But the good thing is you live on. And that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is Peter Richelieu in A Soul's Journey. All right.
So let's talk a little bit more about the book, Betty Ray, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. Henry is the main character, and Henry has just lost his brother during the war. His brother was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and Henry is grieving his brother's death. and he misses his brother so much. And during his grief, he happened to be in Ceylon or Sri Lanka at the time. So Henry had left England and moved to Sri Lanka, and he's grieving in Sri Lanka for his brother's death. And during this period of intense grief, he gets a visitor, the teacher.
Knocks on his door out of the blue, has never met him before.
Shows up in his room and tells him about
how his brother is not dead.
That's right.
And it's just like, whoa, wait a minute. So the story is fascinating because he not only takes him to meet his brother, he takes him to other planes on the other side.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful read, everybody. So if you get a chance, we really encourage you to pick up Peter Richelieu, A Soul's Journey.
It's really juicy. He also meets, I don't want to give away the whole thing, but he also meets the woman he was in love with on Earth. And while he was in Sri Lanka, this woman passed away in England. They were planning to get married, but that didn't happen. She passed away. And when the teacher comes to take Henry to visit the astral realm and see his brother, he also meets this girlfriend of his that
I'd forgotten about that.
That had passed away. And so that wasn't actually set up, but it was a chance meeting because he still had free will. And so the teacher didn't want to interfere with that. But as it turned out, when Henry was visiting the astral realm, he bumped into this old flame of his that, and they reunited in the astral realm. So the idea is that when Henry's in his waking life, he wants to maintain that state of consciousness throughout the dream state, throughout the astral traveling. So it's a little bit complicated to explain, but it's a continuation, a maintaining of that level of consciousness, whether you're awake or you're dreaming or you're visiting the astral realm.
It's really worthwhile because for both of us, I don't know if you told me or I told you about the book, but I think I told you because it was part of a reading group that I had. And the one lady in the reading group was always finding new books for us to read. And when she came up with this one, it was a mind blower. And it was so true that I just knew it was real. It wasn't just fiction because of my own experience with Raphael. So highly recommend it. It's a fun read. So that's Peter Richelieu, A Soul's Journey. Okay,
and the book that I'm going to talk about, I don't have with me because I gave it as a gift to one of my students who expressed interest. And so I just gave her the book. The name of my book is called The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I would say that I read this book in the 1990s. I first came across it, and it was at a time in my life when I was going through a change. I had been recently divorced, and there were many changes going on in my life. And my intuition started becoming more developed during this time. And this book, I don't remember how I stumbled upon it, but it was about following your dream. So the story is about a shepherd boy in Spain who's got a very ordinary life. He just guards the sheep, but he's dreaming big. He's dreaming about finding a treasure at some point in his life. And what that treasure is, we don't know exactly. But the story takes you on the journey of the boy from Spain through North Africa and then across the Sahara Desert and the people that he meets along the way. And one of those people is a very gifted teacher. So let's just call him a teacher. And this teacher teaches him how to pay attention to signs and symbols or omens. And so the boy learns to develop this skill, and he learns from the teacher. And as he's traveling, he comes across these significant events or significant encounters that give him clues as to his search and his journey. And at the time, I was sort of on a journey myself because my life had changed and I was going into a new direction. And this this book just spoke to my soul. It just gave me encouragement to continue to follow my dream, whatever that dream might be. So I highly recommend it. It's an easy read and it's light. It's not too technical. It's not deep and heavy, but it's very enjoyable. In fact, even say a high school student or middle school student could easily read this book and get a lot out of it.
Well, since we're both teachers, when she says she knows about what age levels could read it, she knows what she's talking about. And so the next book that we're having is Eckhart Tolle's book, and it's Eckharttolle. And
I'll put it in there for you.
Holly's going to put it in. And it's called A New Earth. Now, he's written other books, but this one I thought was absolutely fascinating. It's called Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. Now, a lot of times people will ask Raphael, what's my purpose? And Raphael says there are many purposes that you have. It's not just one, because as you evolve, as you grow, each stage of your life, there's a purpose to it. But your life's purpose is awakening of all of the things that your soul desires to experience. And so this was a wonderful read. And as you can see by the book that I have all kinds of, let's put it over here. See all those marks I've got on it? I keep opening it up to various things that I found really, really exciting. And so I really recommend that you look at it. Eckhart Tolle is really a wonderful author, a very spiritual person, and he is talking about the various things that can keep us, the ego. He talks about a lot.
About the ego.
A lot about the ego. The care of the ego is one of the chapters that he talks about. And I never thought about caring about the ego. We've always been taught to try and get rid of the ego. And he really talks about the core of the ego and how really we have got that with us and how we can take care of it. So this is the core of it, as he explains it. That wasn't the title, it wasn't care. And so he talks about complaining and resentment and how that doesn't get us anywhere. And he talks about being right and making wrong. He has a wonderful way of bringing out when we have a mindset, how do we work up with it? Sometimes we get stuck in an idea and it isn't helpful to us. He helps us to see how to get beyond that. So I highly recommend it. He has many different ways of helping us to see through the maze of life, if you will, and how to see it by not carrying the past with us, by gaining what knowledge we can from our past experiences and not letting the ego constantly try to get the upper hand of any situation, but to be calm within and to be able to see other people's point of view without trying to immediately get them to think our way. And so I found this a very valuable book, and there were all kinds of different things that I marked because I thought they were so important. So I highly recommend Eckhart Tolle's book. And here's a picture of the author. It's a very young man, but so wise. He's just amazing.
Actually, his first book, I think it was his first book, The Power of Now,
Yes,
is also just incredible. And
Yes.
if you don't know anything about Eckhart Tolle's personal life and how he became a well-known author, you should check it out because he's gone through hell and back. And that inspired him to write these books about suffering and about the ego and how to get out of that deep despair through just
right. And
the power of now.
I've read all of those as well. But somehow this one, The New Earth, I found was the best of the best. And that's why I'm recommending it. But I do recommend anything this man writes. He's a very spiritual teacher. And it's a joy to be able to read his works.
He's still on YouTube now,
Yes.
too. You can find him on YouTube with many kinds of topics and talks.
Bring his name back up again so you can see it.
Yeah, Eckhart Tolle.
Yes. So that's one of them. We hope you're readers. And if you are, we hope that you are reading spiritual books that will just kind of joggle your mind a little bit and help you to say, never thought of it that way before. And this is an eye opener, this one, because the ego, well, especially I'm a Leo. And so people always say, oh, you have an ego problem. Well, one of the things I learned from a very wise person was that there's two kinds of ego. There's yin ego and yang. Yang ego is one that is self-deprecation and self-doubt, whereas yin ego is where, oh, I can do that probably better than you can. So I realized I was the yin, where I was always putting myself down. I was believing anything anybody told me about my faults. And so they're both ones you have to watch for. It's not just an ego that makes you think you're better than anybody. There's also the one that makes them think you're not as good as anybody.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of times what Raphael talks about in the readings that we do, is that you are perfectly made by God to be only what you can be. Nobody else can do what you can do. And so never let anyone put you down, and never let anybody say that you are less than what you are. And so this was a real helper for me with my yin ego. He helped me to see that ego is not a bad thing. It needs a balance between I'm not good enough to I'm better than you are, in between. Okay, it's your turn now.
All right. So my next book is a book that I got in the 1990s. It was written in, I think, 1946, though. This is called An Autobiography of a Yogi. So back in the 90s, I was working as a speech therapist, and my supervisor, who is of Indian descent, recommended this book to me because we were having conversations, and she said, oh, you've got to read this book. And this was actually before I was introduced to yoga. I'm a yoga teacher, but this was my first exposure to the idea of yoga. And I'm talking about yoga philosophy right now, not necessarily the physical practice, but the practice for steadying the mind, meditation. And even though this was written many, many years ago, this teacher was born at the turn of the century, around 1893, and then into the early 20th century. But what is very unique or interesting about this book is that he tells the story of him growing up, his childhood in India, how he found his guru, his teacher. He knew as a child that he wanted to become a monk. He knew that. He wasn't a very good student in school, but he found his guru, and then it tells the story of him becoming a monk and learning how to meditate. And then eventually his teacher, his guru, tells him that he's going to be bringing the message of yoga and bringing it to the West. And so Paramahansa Yogananda, the author, came to the United States in, I think, the 1920s, and brought his message of peace to the United States. So he's teaching yoga philosophy, but also he's showing the parallels, the teachings of Christ. And he shows us the underlying unity of the great religions from the East and the West. He brings that all in and says that there are so many commonalities between the different religions. And this had such an impact on me that years later, maybe about 10 years later, I also subscribed to Self-Realization Fellowship, which promotes the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. And I did a three-year correspondence course. At that time, it wasn't on the internet, but I did a 3-year correspondence course through Self-Realization Fellowship, which taught me how to meditate. It taught me the beginning practices of yoga, and the very first lesson is about learning how to sit in meditation. Not all the crazy practices where you're standing on your head, but just learning how to sit and sit quietly to prepare your mind for meditation. So it's funny when I look back at the books that I've read and how they played a role in my life. And it's interesting how one thing led to another, not just in the books, but in my life, because later I became a yoga teacher. at the time that I read this book, I never would have guessed that I would become a yoga instructor. So that was my introduction to yoga, and I recommend it. In fact, what I do is it's also on audio, so you can get an audio version of this book. And when I had to make a 10-hour drive from Michigan to Wisconsin to visit my parents, I used to get the book on audio. And so I would listen to it while I'm in the car. And for 10 hours, like 10 hours straight, I'm listening to the book, and then 10 hours back, I listen. So I could get through the book in one trip. And so it just made the ride that much more enjoyable. I highly recommend getting an audio version of your favorite book or a book that you're interested, so that you can listen to it while you're driving, or sit in your easy chair and listen to it. If you don't want to read, you can listen to it on an audio version.
Great. And I like that idea of getting the audio version, because sometimes you just don't have time to sit down and do something. I have a friend who is constantly working, and the only way she could read a book would be to put earphones on while she's working. But she can do that. She doesn't have to pay attention to what it is that she's doing. So the next book.
Okay, so the next book that had a big impact on my life is called A Course in Miracles. This is a pretty thick book here, and it's fine print, so it's a thick book. But I would say I learned about this book in 2006, 2007, around that time. The book was written in the 70s, but I stumbled across it with a friend. Together, we came across this book. And it's, like I said, it's very dense. This is actually a channeled book. So the person who compiled this book, her name is Helen Schuckman. She was a medical psychologist at Columbia University. And the problem, or what prompted the writing of this book, was that she was working with a team of psychologists, and they were having trouble with team building, morale, supporting each other. They were having a lot of problems in their work relationships. So she and another colleague got together, and she actually received the information in this book through channeling. So it came to her through inspiration. And she says that it was Jesus Christ. The Christ is the one who channeled this information to her, and she just acted as the scribe and recorded it. She and her colleague recorded it. So that idea of an inspired book like that too, at the time, it was just a new concept for me. So that was just,
for a lot of people,
hard for me to
didn't understand
get with that,
channeling.
wrap my mind around that. But I highly recommend it. And what I did, and I recommend, is that don't start in the beginning, because the beginning is really dense. I recommend that you start with the workbook. The workbook is in the back of the book, and it starts with, there's like one lesson each day. So you can use it as like a daily meditation, a daily,
great idea.
Just something small that you can read each day, and it will train your mind to think of things from a different perspective. So there are 365 daily lessons in this book, and it's a self-study. So you can go at your own pace, but because the workbook is set up in 365 lessons, my friend and I decided to do it together. So we read the lessons together, and then we could talk about it. Because talk about blowing my mind. Yes, it was blowing my mind, because, for example, the first lesson starts with lesson number 1. Nothing I see in this room or on the street or from the window or in this place means anything. So nothing I see around me means anything. What?
Yeah, that's a hard concept.
That's hard to
swallow.
swallow.
It means that's a tree, and that's this, and that's a chair.
Right. So it says, just look around your room and say, this table means nothing. This chair means nothing. and you go around the room and you name objects and they mean nothing. They don't mean anything. That was the very first lesson. And of course, it takes a while to get your mind wrapped around it, but it leads you through those lessons until it trains your mind, sometimes without even you being aware of it. And suddenly it clicks. You're like, oh, what does it do? It changes, it helps you look at things from a different perspective. And while I was reading this book, so from a different perspective, meaning the oneness that we have with God,
concept.
the oneness that we have with love, the oneness that we have with everyone around us. We are all one is the theme that runs throughout the book. And at the same time that I was reading that book, of course, I had a friend to talk about it with. I also was reading The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. So this is based on A Course in Miracles. So Gary Renard, the author of The Disappearance of the Universe, read A Course in Miracles. And then this book talks about his experience with two teachers. He was meditating for several years. Gary Renard was meditating for several years, and two teachers showed up in his living room, similar to Richie Lou's book, where the teacher just showed up in the living room.
Wow.
And then the theme of this book is mainly about forgiveness. What is forgiveness? It's not just thinking that, oh, I forgive this person because they did something wrong to me.
No.
There's a new concept of forgiveness in this book. And it also is in A Course in Miracles. The idea is that nobody has done something to you, but we're playing these roles, right? You can jump in, Betty Ray. We're playing these roles on our stage in this lifetime, and we have people coming into our lives, and we're learning from those interactions. We're learning from those relationships. And so we are agreeing to play a role, and the other person is agreeing to play a role, so that we can learn from that and gain knowledge and gain wisdom from that. So this book talks about forgiveness, past lives, and he recorded conversations that he had with these two teachers over a period of 10 years.
Whoa.
And then he put them in this book. And then Gary Renard went on to write other books too. But I'm just saying, at the time, this was in like 2006 to 2010. These two books, A Course in Miracles and Disappearance of the Universe, really, really had a big impact on me. And
tell me again what he meant by the disappearance of the universe.
So it's similar to the idea that from the Course in Miracles, where he says
everything is one.
The chair doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
A table means nothing. And so the disappearance of the universe, to put it in a few words, is that what we think is the world, the way we see the world, is an illusion. It's not solid. There are different ways of looking at the world, or different ways of looking at this universe. This is just one of the universes. We're actually in a multiverse, right? Because there are many universes.
And dimensions beyond.
Right.
And we're learning that too. So whatever labels we put on things are because that's how we see it in the moment.
Right.
But as we advance and as we grow, we begin to look at things differently. And we begin to see God in all things, is what we have said before with Raphael.
Right.
Everything is energy. And when you put it in a package of vibrating energy of different frequencies, you begin to understand that everything is God, because God is the source of all energy. And so every book that you read, God has had that influence on that person's life. So The Disappearance of the Universe is a wonderful description of a person's realization of that idea. And so we're typing it up, and we're going to put it out there so that you can see it. And we highly recommend that you read some of these books. And you know what? When you focus on things that are beyond your thinking in this moment, when you begin to focus on what is not your real life to you, and you begin looking and studying the spirit world, wow, it is the most joyous trip you're ever going to take. So we recommend that if you don't like to read, get some books on tape that explain about the spirit world from some of these
And
teachers.
tell us what you are
Yes.
reading or what you are listening to. Tell us what has inspired you or what made an impact on your life. Put it in the comments or send us an email. We'd like to know what books made an impact
Absolutely.
on you in your life.
We'd like to hear from you, so don't hesitate to make your, good morning to you, Johnny.
Hi, Johnny.
Thank you for joining us. And I know you have had a long journey of studying metaphysics, and it has changed your life from being my student in junior high school to now when we're adults and you're a married woman with a child that's grown up already. So it's been a long time that Johnny has been in my life. And it's so wonderful to know that she continues to pop in now and then. So thank you for coming, Johnny. We enjoy it. Any comments that you'd like to make about your journey, your spiritual journey? We're more than willing to talk about that too. So, and anybody else that's out there, don't hesitate to come in and put in a word or two, because we are wide open. We never make any judgments about anybody. We know that you are exactly in life where you are meant to be. Your soul has a story to tell. So please join us and come and make a comment. So Johnny, thank you. Any comments you would like to make about your favorite book? What is your favorite book? I know you're a reader. You were a very brilliant student of mine, and a lot of people didn't recognize it like I did. And I think that was one of the things that helped you, was that I did encourage you to let your mind expand and do all the things that it needed to do. So we're doing that for you, our listeners, and those of you who are here. We're encouraging you to expand your mind and your awareness of spirit. And any book that falls into your hands, and believe me, if you're in a bookstore of spiritual stuff, sometimes it can actually fall off the shelf and knock you on the head. That's how spirit will work. It will say, you read this book.
And the same thing can happen when you're online. You could be watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast, and something will come in your feed and you're like, I wonder what that's about. And so you check that out. That's the same thing as a book falling off the shelf. It's just
Right.
coming up in your feed, or a friend mentions something, or someone you're watching on YouTube or listening to on a podcast mentions another book or another audio or another podcast.
This is the way it works. When you are open to spirit, it comes in so many different ways. I remember I had a big decision to make at one point in my life, and I was debating this way and debating that way. And I'm driving along in the car, and on this huge billboard, the word choice. It was like, how could spirit be more? Don't just sit there and debate this and debate that. Make a decisions. Move ahead. Don't just keep dwelling on what should you do, what couldn't you do, why should you do this. Don't shoot on yourself. Let's put it that way. And instead, whatever gives your heart a sort of a humming feeling that, yes, this is the right way to go, then just pick up your courage and go. Because every minute, Spirit is working with you and trying to help you every way it can. When I talk about Spirit, we're talking about angels and guides, because they're all in spirit. Angels don't actually have bodies. They are pure spirits. But spirit guides are people who have gained a great deal of knowledge and have trained to be spirit guides. So I have to tell you, your grandmother isn't your spirit guide, because it isn't usually somebody that you knew before. They're sometimes not very wise yet. And so you may hear from them if some people are able to do that. I know a friend of mine that loved to go to seances, but I never would do one because I felt that it wasn't the right way to go. And that's how I ended up with Raphael. And he certainly was the right way to go. So you too have guardian angels, and you too have all of the archangels that are willing to be with you, to be spirit guides for you. So the books that you be inclined to read, trust that when a book comes in your face, like we are right now, we are giving you that opportunity to read these books that we have found valuable for our own journey through the planet.
Yeah, and keep in mind that these are books maybe from years ago, because I chose some books that were at the beginning of my journey, right? So when I was becoming more aware, so I chose a few books that were important to me at that time. But yeah, if we come up to date, there are newer books. And of course, there's a ton of material out there online through YouTubes and podcasts and internet published materials. So
trust the guidance that you get, because when you go online and you go to a bookstore or whatever online, trust that you're being divinely guided to go there in the first place. And then trust that if you get an urge or you get that inner feeling, yeah, this is a book I need to explore, then don't question it anymore. Just do it. And I think Johnny has learned to do that, haven't you, Johnny? That you are learning to trust that inner divine guidance. And it has led you through a lot of challenges in your life, I know, and has led you to a point now where it is pretty good life, isn't it? And so we're happy that from way back when you were a junior high student, you are now a happy mom and enjoying life in your marriage and what is ever going on in your life. So thank you for joining us, and I hope that more people will tune in to us and what you do, subscribe to our channel so that we can be here with you each week.
tell us how you got through the pandemic, because during the pandemic, when we were forced to be isolated or in our homes, so a lot of people spent a lot of time on screen, online. So what were the things you listened to or the things that you watched that inspired you or gave you hope during the pandemic? That's when a lot of people just were nonstop, maybe watching Netflix or watching some favorite YouTubers or listening to podcasts. Tell us what you listened to or what you watched during the pandemic to get you through that.
Those are always good things to do on this channel, because ask Raphael. Raphael, although he's written books through me, it's still, when we hear about what you are reading, that's important for us to share with others too. So don't hesitate to email me at angelbettyray@gmail.com or Holly
at goldeneagle623@gmail.com. And I'll put that in the chat here. So, Betty Ray, why don't you tell us about how Raphael inspires you to write a book? Can you share with us?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I was introduced to Raphael through my journaling. I can't recommend journaling enough, because it isn't just writing about, well, I cleaned the house today. It's more about, I was actually singing songs while I cleaned the house today, and I found that was helpful if I turn on music and have to do some mundane chore. Those are the things you write down in your journal, and that is something that helps you when you're kind of down in the dumps. You can go back and you can look at the journal that lifts you up. So we really recommend that you get a journal. And it was through journaling that I asked a question of God. And in fact, I was asking a question of my soul. I wrote SOM was who I was talking to, and it meant soul of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would talk to soul of me. And at this one time, I got an answer back, and I knew it wasn't me talking. And I went, who is this? And it said Hagar and Omar. And I was like, oh, no way. And I actually quit. I backed off from the computer. It was scary because I didn't know who Hagar and Omar were. Okay. So I talked to a friend of mine, another teacher, and she wrote on the blackboard, because I was a music teacher I had in my music room, and the piano was right next to the blackboard. And she wrote on the blackboard, turn on your computer, ask who they are. So I got up enough nerve, and I did. And eventually I found out that they were my soul, who was Omar, and Hagar was the name that I had given to Raphael many, many lifetimes ago. And so when they told me about it, of course, I didn't remember anything. Mm-hmm. But then I began talking to them in my journaling. And it was where the first book came through, Life in Three Dimensions, was actually, I was able to channel that, because it was like writing a book. You get the ideas and they flow through your fingers and onto the page. That was actually how the first book with Raphael was channeled. So this was a whole new area. I didn't even know what channeling was. And it was scary at first, as I said. I just sort of backed off and went, woo, I don't know about this. But then it has been so wonderful that when I really opened up to this spirit guide and this wonderful Archangel, Raphael is considered the healer. that I encourage all of you to find your spirit guide by simply talking to yourself in a journal. And the information comes through. So if you're good at typing, which I wasn't at the time, I was doing it in these little notebooks. And if you are, talk to yourself and ask God to inspire you and have someone come and talk with you. And then let your imagination play. Because sometimes we just imagine things, but it turns out it's really a gift from God through our spirit guides. So talk to yourself in a journal and wait for answers that you know are coming from you. And then you say, okay, God, I'm open and ready for new knowledge and new inspiration. And you'll be amazed at how it will be. And in fact, there's other people that have done this and have written. Who's the young man that wrote the book about God? He talked to God.
Donald Walsh?
Yes.
Oh, Conversations with God?
Yes.
Okay.
But he just wrote it on a big yellow pad. And but he was doing the same thing that I was doing and began talking to Raphael. And so it's true. It can happen. And so begin doing your own journaling and talking to your own guardian angel. Ask who your guardian angel is. And if you get an idea that's in your head, don't doubt it. Just write it down. You might get clarifications later, but don't hesitate. Writing in a journal, mostly about your emotions. Don't write, oh, I went to the store and bought groceries today. You don't care about that. Write about, oh, I got in line with this woman that was so pushy and she pushed ahead of me and it made me so angry I wanted to smack her. But then I took a deep breath and I let her go ahead of me. So those are the kinds of things. Talk about your emotions and about how you feel about life. This will help you to find out who you really are, what your purpose is for being here. You will find out so much about yourself if you keep an emotional journal. So I highly recommend it to you. And your own angels and guides can come through and talk to you. Just as we called Raphael, I didn't know who it was at first. And this young man thought he was talking to God. Could have been. I don't know that God has a language, but God uses your language to talk to you. So don't hesitate to do that. Really, really encourage it. Okay. Hi, William Kenner. He says, good afternoon, Betty and Holly. As a voracious book reader, I've walked in and books literally fell in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I also enjoy audiobooks. I read all topics. Thank you for sharing with us. That is exactly what we're looking for. Now, I have a friend who's never read a book. When she first told me that, my mouth fell open. I could not believe there was anybody on the planet that's never read a book. But then I had to realize that each of us has a different story to tell. And I can't judge another person by my story. I have to learn to accept their story as perfect and God-driven for them. So you can't judge people who might read fiction books all the time, never read anything that's spiritual. But we, Holly and I, recommend that you pick up some spiritual books because, like these books that we've been telling you, they can boost you up to the next level of your development.
So Johnny and Dr. Kenner, if you don't mind, please put in the comments some books that you have read.
Yes,
and something that you have to say. I know, Dr. Kenner, you've read a ton of books, but can you think of any that you've heard, listened to, or read that you would recommend? Please put them in the comments or put them on the YouTube comments if you can't put them in here today.
Well, I'm sure you can. So, and that's the same, Johnny. I know you're a voracious reader, and so we know that you've had a library of books. Well, if you see my house now, I've got one whole wall, floor to ceiling, that has books on it. And on the other side of the room, I've got bookshelves, oak bookshelves. And when Holly came, I said, put your books on the bookshelves. And so I had to squeeze my books up and put them up
But
there.
you know what I had to do before I moved here? I had to pick and sort through my books, and I had to give some books away. And so
that would be giving my heart away.
because I wanted to limit the number of boxes I was bringing with me. So I had to go through the books and pick and sort and give away the books that I thought I got the message. You know how something means something to you and you're like, I just want to hang on to that. But I thought, okay, it's time to send these books on to someone else, put them in someone else's hands, and maybe they'll get some enjoyment out of it. And then they'll pass it on to someone else too. So, the Seed of the Soul.
That's a great one.
Yes.
Now, who's the author of that? Do I remember?
Help us, Dr. Kenner, Seed of the Soul.
Who's the author? Spiritual must read.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember reading it too and thinking that, and it probably helped me understand when Raphael started talking about the different souls and the different ages and stages of growth that the soul goes through. Okay, so
Go ahead.
Yes, yes. So if you can do that, we'd really, really like to see it. Seed of the Soul, a spiritual must read.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that with us. How about you, Johnny? Do you have any books that you've read that were helpful for you? You had a pretty turbulent youth, if I remember right. Did you have any books back then that you remember that were helpful to get you through? I know that if people are book readers at all, they'll find some book that they'll remember through their life.
Gary Zukov. Thank you. Gary Zukov.
Zukov. There we go. You can see that too. So good. There's a good book there. Everybody has one.
I'll put it on the chat for Jason to put online. So go ahead.
Okay, good. So we recommend that you find a book between now and next week when you come back to visit us, and that you tell us about it. I know you maybe won't have time to get through it in a whole week, but how you found that book, how it either dropped in your hands or somebody recommended it, or as we are doing now, maybe you'll pick up some of these books that we have talked about.
Or podcasts. If you're listening to podcasts or you have some YouTubers that you follow and you gain some encouragement or inspiration from these people, please share them with us. We'd like to know.
So that we can share them with others. Because in this turbulent time on our planet, when there's so many things that are up in the air about global warming, about politics
and polarity. Oh my goodness.
Yes, so we do need to have some kind of stabilizer in books that are spiritual and that are timeless and timely, because those kinds of books could be written back 1,000 years ago, even though they don't even know they had it back then.
Well, I one of the books I was going to mention is the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, which goes back thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
Yes, so
Wow.
that's if you want to get deep into the yoga philosophy. So I studied that when I was learning to become a yoga teacher, but that's quite deep. Okay. But it was life-changing. So,
and it looks like we're coming to the end of our day, and we are so glad that we could be here with you and share with you some of the books that were life-changing for us. And next time when you come back to visit, and thank you for doing that, please subscribe, please tell your friends about us, and let us know what your favorite books are. Until next time, keep reading and keep learning. Look at me, never too old to learn something new. I always believe that. As a teacher, and both of us are teachers, we know that teachers are always learning. And that's why we're sharing with you what we are learning.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye now.